My name is Doniga Markegard, and it's great to be up in the Pacific Northwest. We spent a wonderful day out moving in the wilderness, tracking animals, and those of you who were there, I think we all had a really great time and learned a lot. Now I'm going to be talking about my current work. I have a background in permaculture and wildlife tracking, and now I am a regenerative rancher in the San Francisco Bay Area. So that's my family there, and my husband and 4 kids and we steward 10,000 acres of coastal terrace prairie rangeland, both north and south of San Francisco, and we raise grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, pasture-raised pork, and pasture-raised chicken and forest-raised pork. Just to give you a little bit of context of where we are. We're in California. Yeah, can we turn the light? Oh, we can't see that. Okay, yeah, they can't see the light. Sorry about that. Okay, so
Thank you.
California's coastal prairie is the most diverse in plant species in all grassland types in North America. And so on our one ranch alone, we've cataloged 157 species of plants. So it's incredibly diverse, and it's that diversity that we'll talk about as I go on, of how important that is for the regeneration of our soils and what's going on underground. And then I want to start with basically our philosophy is to work with nature. So there I am moving a group of the belted Galloway cattle that we raise, and we use a variety of different fencing, but that's just a hot wire fence, and they're moved anywhere from twice a day to, depending on the season and time of year, it might be a couple weeks. But we work with nature to mimic how these grasslands evolve. So they evolve with large herds of grazing animals, such as elk and antelope, and the same out here. There used to be enormous amounts of ruminants out on the land grazing. And so that's how these grasslands really thrive. And the cattle, because they have all of this great gut, all these microbes in their gut, they have an incredible exchange with the soil, where they're fertilizing the soil, and in the dry times, the life in their gut is really feeding that soil through their manure. And then we also work with something that has been coined by an indigenous man named Enrique Solomon, called concentric ecology. And so as we look at the biodiversity on our lands, we look at all species and take an indigenous viewpoint as much as we can. And we want to honor all of the indigenous people who lived on these lands hundreds of years ago in a balance with the ecosystem. So the term concentric ecology essentially means that they're viewing themselves as part of nature, as tending the wild, and that we're not separate. We share the same origin, and we are all kin to all of those species. So I think once we shift that view, and we look at ourselves as land tenders, and not just that, oh, we need to stay away from these lands and let them go back to nature. Well, there was very much human interaction when these lands were really abundant and prolific. And we lease land from Land Trust. Are there any folks from the Land Trust here? Great to see ya. So we lease lands from the Land Trust, we lease public lands, and I know probably everybody has their own opinion about public and private and land trust and all of that, and we have a lot of experience working with these different groups and agencies, and just how we can work together to achieve goals. And so just sort of a quick side story. We were just hiking out to the Ozette, out to the coast there, and it was just incredible to go along and see all of the forage plants out there. We were picking the Pacific crabapple and all of the different types of berries, and then you get out to the coast and you see this incredible crabapple orchard with grasses underneath. And but it also is sort of sad because so many of those plants seem like they're struggling. There's, everybody's sticking to one trail. There's not the abundant herds of elk that I'm sure there once were. The villages of the indigenous people are not there, so they're not pruning those trees, and they're not interacting with all of those species. And because it's government owned, I think we're lacking a lot of that sort of what happens when you tend your food source. So that's really what we're looking at, is tending the wild to produce abundant food for families. And just to give you a bit of a global context, just to give you a little global context, so you don't just say, oh, who's this crazy California chick here talking to me, spending my Saturday night. This is a really pressing issue in our time. And so up there is a picture of myself and Stéphane Le Foll, who's the French Minister of Agriculture. And he just traveled out to California last week for the Global Climate Summit that we hosted in San Francisco. And the producers were invited to be a part of that. And it was the first time that I knew about that farmers and ranchers were actually really, the government officials, the legislators really went out of their way to make sure farmers and ranchers were there at the summit. And so basically, it was a pretty big, a big deal because California just signed on to the 4 per 1,000 initiative. Is anybody familiar with that? So it's something that this Stéphane Le Foll, the Minister of Agriculture in France, started at the COP21 in Paris in 2015. And basically, the research and the science is that the only solution for food security and climate change is to store the carbon in the world's agricultural soils. And it's something that that France initiated at the climate summit in Paris. A number of countries signed on. The U.S. was not at the table. They didn't show up. So California took it upon themselves to, as a state, sign on to the initiative. So I think that's really how it's going to, need to happen, is that, it's great to see people acting locally and regionally and within our state, and then maybe we can get more states to sign on until we sort of get to absorb the country, because it's not going to happen at the federal level. So basically the overview of what this means, and it really is regenerative agriculture, is what is going to make this possible, this 4 per 1,000 initiative. So do not leave bare soil and work it less to limit carbon losses. So as you saw on our rangeland, we don't till the soil. Raising grass-fed livestock, you're promoting wild spaces and you're promoting grassland biodiversity, because you want the plants to stay greener longer. You want to promote perennials, and there's no reason to till. There's no reason to release that carbon. The more you cover the soil, the more it becomes rich in organic matter and carbon. And you nourish the soils with manure or compost. Restore crops, pastures, and degraded forests, and the arid and semi-arid areas of our planet. So much of the planet has become desertified, and we can help bring, and a lot of that problem was livestock, but poorly managed livestock. But we can use that also as a solution, because like I said, the cattle and the livestock, they keep those good living microbes in their gut in those dry areas when those microbes can't survive outside of the gut. So plant trees and legumes, which fix nitrogen, collect water at the foot of plants, and our ranch is great for that because we have this coastal fog, and so we still have plants that stay green even though all of the other hills are brown. And then so the other thing is, let's see. Every year, plants recover 30% of CO2 through uh-oh. We got a power outage. Okay, here we go. This might be interesting. So every year, plants store 30% of the CO2 from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. And let's see. Going. And so we can increase that by making sure we have green plants growing for longer periods of time on more of the Earth's surface. And essentially increasing that with this 4 per 1,000 initiative, basically what that means is you're increasing the storage of carbon by 4%. And that essentially would halt the increase of CO2 that we currently put in the atmosphere globally. So, I mean, these are very, very bold statements, and it's going to take a huge effort for farmers and ranchers across the globe to shift their practices, but it is possible. There is hope. And so basically what we're looking at is rural areas like this. So there's 570 million farms in the world and 3 billion people in rural areas. So the cities are looking towards the rural areas to say, okay, well, how can we restore these soils? And then, I'm part of a number of different projects like the Marin Carbon Project, who's really pioneered a lot of the carbon sequestration on rangelands using a light dusting of compost to just kickstart the carbon cycle. And some of these ranches are measuring a 20% annual increase in carbon. So I'm sure there's going to be some farms and ranches that are storing a lot more, and some less in this initiative. So this is the carbon cycle. If you can look at what we want to promote, and is holistically managed land where there's more roots, more diversity of roots, and carbon is stored in the soil where it belongs, versus conventionally managed land where there's a lot of bare soil, there's a lack of diversity, and the carbon is released. So a lot of your typical row crop land and conventionally managed cattle. So this is some of the lands that we're on. This is one of the ranches we lease from the Wildlands Conservancy, which is the largest private landowner in California. They're also a land trust, and they've got a great model because they not only are really backing conservation and having public access and kids to have access to nature, but they actively seek out those who are doing regenerative ranching and specifically grass-fed local beef production to lease their rangeland. So this piece of land is in total probably about 8,000 acres, a little under 2,000 acres of grassland, and it's just beautiful. I mean, these grasslands are incredible, and they are becoming less and less productive globally, and we're starting to see so much of the disappearance of these grasslands. And so, you know, we look towards the nation that destroys its soil, destroys itself. So looking at these incredible areas that you can just imagine, like there's the Russian River right there, just the salmon that would run that river every year, and the large herds of elk, and you know the people that were living here and really stewarding that land. So what we found and what science has shown is that the current tool to restore these grasslands is properly managed livestock. And so here comes the cow. And this is a slide from a soil scientist from Australia, Dr. Judy Earle. So you know, the cow has huge horsepower. It's a mower, a fertilizer, you know, 4 times a mulcher, and a carbon converter fermentation vat, and it's the ultimate biological farming unit. And so, you know, I do a lot of these talks and listen to different people that, you know, different scientists and researchers and that are looking at this regenerative agriculture and how to actually make this happen. And yes, crop diversity is great. Yes, no-till is really, really important to shift our farms to no-till, so we're not constantly disrupting that soil structure and that soil food web. But without livestock, you don't have the biology. You don't have that biology because the connection with livestock and soil is really key. And you know, if it's like that in nature, right? You don't have nature without animals. And so you don't have a regenerative agriculture that is truly functioning without animals. And so you can see this is an example. What we have on this Jenner Headlands, there was one species that the cattle prior to us being on the ranch did not graze. So we bunch our cattle together and they graze in a higher intensity, shorter duration, and then they move on. And so what they leave is, you know, all of that forage that once it grows up and dies, it oxidizes. So it has this chemical reaction. And if it's not touching the soil, it can't decompose. So then the cattle come in and they mulch it in, and then it can decompose and really build that soil. And so essentially what we're doing as farmers and ranchers who are practicing this is we're capturing light energy. We're light farmers because we're working on that process of photosynthesis. We want as much of those green leaves to have access to the sun. We don't want a bunch of dead plants shading the understory. We want that light to come in, and we want to really work on that. There's some great soil scientists from Australia. So another one is, her name's Dr. Christine Jones, and when you hear her talk about soil, it's like poetry because she calls it the liquid carbon pathway, that through photosynthesis the light transfers into the plant and transforms into simple sugars, which then feed the soil food web, and creates more nutrient-dense food. And so then here's another example of a field that has been untouched by grazing animals for 15 years. Public land. They kicked out the cattle, they kicked out the families that lived on the land, and they found that the biodiversity plummeted. So then we can't come in, and that's one of my daughters and I, and we bring in the cattle and we trample, and then that life comes back. So these are some of the species that we have on these rangeland. That's a native California perennial, the California oak grass. I mean, look at those roots. And it's all of those roots. I mean, the root hairs can go literally for miles. And they're connected with mycelium. And so that plant, if it were to grow and not get bitten, it would just eventually die off. It would shade the plants around it, and it wouldn't have that vibrancy. So this is another one of the places that we have our cattle, and you can see the fence line contrast. So on the left is predominantly native bunchgrass pasture, which is on the ranch that we have cattle on. It's called the Place of Hope and Beauty. And on the other side of the fence is conventionally managed land. So you can see the rocks are starting to come up, and it's almost like the soil is sinking, or else our soil is growing. I'm not sure which one. So, basically it's you allow the plants to fulfill their life cycle. You allow those plants to be all that they can be. You allow the soil to be all that the soil can be. So with the cycle of a grass plant is birth, growth, death, and decay, and a constant cycle: birth, growth, death, and decay. And so if it's stuck in the death cycle and nothing's coming, there's not the biology to decay it, which you don't have as much of that problem here in Washington, that cycle will not continue and feed the soil. And then just as we want to promote diversity above ground, it's mirrored below ground. So this is, you can see the variation of root architecture of Native American prairie plants, and just, look at those roots, and they're all serving different functions. And it is so important to keep those plants on the ground, keep them growing, keep them vibrant. So it's that diversity in the soil that is going to give the nutrition to those plants. So the row crops, even if they're organic, that we buy today, they have gone, every single nutrient has reduced in the percentage from anywhere from 25% to 100%. The nutrition has diminished in the last 50 years. So copper's down by 76%, iron 27%, calcium 46%, magnesium 24%, and potassium 16%. So we're needing to eat a lot more food to get the same amount of nutrition that our great-grandparents did. So what is that? How does that help us to function and have the appropriate brain capacity to really to be a fully functioning human being? So a lot of this has come to us and our family through that connection with nature. And so I have a background in wildlife tracking, and that's me tracking a mountain lion. And my husband just had an amazing experience this morning when he was out deer hunting. He came across a mountain lion who was also hunting a buck. And he got right up onto this mountain lion, and he sent me the video, and he was just so ecstatic that, you know, he was part of that, like right there, hunting along beside another apex predator. Like, wow, this is what it's all about, right? So to interact with nature in that way, and as I described to the group earlier today, tracking applies to everything, because when you're tracking, you're living in the present moment, and you're aware of your surroundings. You know, you're aware of the bird language. You're aware of, you know, if there's predators nearby. But you're also tracking the past. You know, what's happened with the ecology of that area. You know, why is the mountain lion traveling this route, or the deer, or the elk, or the bear? You know, what has brought that animal here? And then you're projecting yourself into the future. You know, where is that animal now? So we can apply that same thinking to any work we do. And tracking is the oldest science known to humankind, and it really challenges so much of your brain. And you know, we track to survive, and you know, so much of the things that we do now are disconnected from those basic survival mechanisms. And then part of our work is that we're a family ranch, and you know, those are our shrinking. Family farms and ranches are shrinking across the country, and you know, I know you've all have seen it here. Farms get consolidated, or they're too small to survive, and they move out of the area. The next generation doesn't take on the farm or ranch. So we wanted to create something that really was lasting into the future generations. So we created a holistic context. Can you tell me what time it is, just so I can know?
7 to 12.
Okay, great. I want to give time for questions. So, has anybody been familiar with Alan Savory? His work with holistic management. So, you know, it's an incredible lesson for anyone, no matter if you're in farming or ranching. Essentially, you look at the quality of life that you're looking to achieve. And then you look at your forms of production. What are you going to do to produce that quality of life? But you start with that quality. You start with, you know, what kinds of things that you really need to be content and to fulfill your vision. And then how you're going to produce that. And then what are you going to leave for the future? You know, what is your legacy? So our mission is to steward grasslands by mimicking natural systems through regenerative agriculture practices. And we do this by keeping our home fire burning with strong family values of love for each other and the earth, and to make a big impact for the future generations by influencing large-scale restoration of watersheds and the grasslands within them, while producing nutrient-dense food for thousands of families. So this is something that we keep on our wall. We look back at it and say, okay, are we moving towards our holistic context? And can we really say that each action is done with intention? You know, every choice we make, we come across so many choices every day. Is that choice done with intention towards a greater shared vision? And so, you know, our kids love this life. You know, they love being on the ranch, and you know, you can't replace it. I mean, people we have, a huge customer base being where we are located so close to San Francisco. And people come out and just say, oh my gosh, this is the dream life. And these are people that are, incredibly successful in Silicon Valley. I mean, we have Mark Zuckerberg that comes and shops at our farmer's market stand. And, they look towards this life and, they dream of being able to have their kids experience some of this too. And, when you look at it, you look at our health, the health of our children, and the soil health are very much linked. And I showed a picture of our skin and the surface of the soil, and there's so many examples of this, of how our bodies are so similar to how the soil functions. And there's a great book called Pharmacology by Daphne Miller, who's a researcher and physician, and she's got some great images of the way the roots interact with microbes, and right next to it is a picture of our intestinal gut microbiota, and you can't tell the difference of what's what. They're so similar. So our health and the soil health as basically three elements: the parents, which we don't have a lot of control over, which is our genes, and the parents is the rock that the soil comes from. And then our environment. Our environment really shapes us, and the environment of the soil really shapes the soil. And then the action, what is the action? And that's something that we can really start to shape. The action for our health is our diet. We're unhealthy, we change our diet. We find what really works for us. We eat foods from our local region. We work to increase the diversity of our microbiome, and that research is just really growing in leaps and bounds right now, of how our diet is so linked to our health, and looking at indigenous cultures and how they have so much of a diverse microbiome in their gut, and it's directly linked to their environment and what they eat and the foods they eat from their local area. And so the action for soil health is agriculture. What are we going to do with agriculture to have healthy soils? And then, with the humans, we look at what's going on right now in our environment. This is a graph that shows that the average time of our youth on that same chart, just plummeting. So there's a lot of great research too. I was on a panel with this production company, Vice Media, based in Brooklyn, and the Sutter Health, which is kind of like Kaiser or a big health organization in Northern California, and they're looking at this and saying, we need to prescribe. They're prescribing less screen, a lot less, like trying to minimize that screen time. And I'm saying, hey, you need to prescribe time in nature. You need to have another alternative so these kids can actually fully develop as human beings. And then we look at, okay, what does that look like? That's Larry there on his horse falcon. There's Larry, my son, right over here. And that's us moving the cattle. And you can also see there in the fence line, maybe you can't see it that great from this slide, but you can see where we moved the cattle out of. And we didn't graze it down to like that. We still left plenty of litter, plenty of leaf surface area for the photosynthesis to take, to take action and to recover those plants. But we're moving them into a area where the plants are fully recovered after the grazing before. So that may take, we may not move cattle into an area for, depending on the season, it may be 60 days, it may be 90 days, it may be 6 months. So it really just depends on your environment. And then there's a Lakota saying or phrase that is wichozani, which is health of mind, body, and spirit. And I think that, you know, a lot of times farm kids can really embody that. You know, you all are around farm kids, and they haven't lost that. They haven't lost that connection. And there's a great study out that compares Amish farm children with Hutterite farm children, and they're, you know, similar groups, similar origins. However, the Amish have kept their traditional farming methods. They still use animal husbandry. They farm with horses. They don't have electricity. The kids are in contact with animals all the time. And the Hutterites of North Dakota have adopted all of the modern farming practices with chemicals. They keep their cows in the barns, and barns aren't places for kids to go and play. They don't have access to those farm animals. And what they're seeing is incredible. By studying their microbiome and the sort of the dust in the house and the you know, what they're picking up from their environment, these Amish kids have incredible immunities, where their asthma and allergy rates are pretty much next to zero. And the nation's average is 10% of kids now have asthma. You know, it's a serious issue, and they link that directly to that they did not have a sterile environment growing up. Then they had access, in particular, to livestock and the dust from that livestock. So that all ties together with their health. So that was our cattle, kind of how we manage our grass-fed cattle, and we also have grass-fed sheep. So this is, and we graze them the majority of the year on an organic cover crop. So this is my other daughter, Quince, who in this picture, she was in first grade, and she had just spent the whole day with me building sheep fence. You can see she's very dirty, but very happy. And she said, I'm gonna go back to school and say I'm the only first grader that knows how to build fence. So she's great. She likes to ride the sheep too. But this is, you can see her before the sheep went in, and you can just see this cover crop of Sudan grass just shoots up. It's incredible. And then the sheep come in as that biological farming unit, and they graze that, and then they fertilize it. And this is on a pretty, you know, we would call it like a medium size organic farm in our area. They farm about close to 200 acres of diversified vegetable crops. They sell at CSA, farmers market. And so they don't charge us a lease or anything. They just really want the sheep there, because it means one less pass in the tractor for them. They're not needing to mow that cover crop and mulch it in, because the sheep are doing that. It means less fertilizer, because the sheep are fertilizing that. And they had done, it was transition agriculture, so transition from conventional agriculture into organic. So the soil had just really been hammered by being you know, planted in one crop year after year after year. So this is what, you know, he saw as the only solution to rapidly get his profits up through that, you know, after that transition period, was to bring in the animals. And he plants it every year with different crops based on what the soil needs. And so, you know, this was just one of the years of what he planted. So that's the lamb. We also raise quite a few pigs. We finish probably close to 200 pigs a year. And they're great. They're out sort of in the brushy areas. We just started putting them more into forest areas. So, we have a huge issue with wildfires as, so we're seeing so much of these extreme weather events. So what are we gonna do about it? Are we gonna go in there and spray a bunch of herbicide? Are we gonna spend a bunch of energy clearing all those fire ladders and understory, chipping it up and putting it where? Or are we gonna produce food in the process? So we look at pigs as sort of the pioneer species. So they come in and we cross fence the forest lands, and they clear all of that understory. They eat the poison oak. They eat the blackberries. They eat the anything that's green basically in the understory, and they make trails and they make it accessible. So what we see, and it may be different here, but in a lot of our real dense forest areas, second growth forest areas, the Douglas firs have taken over, and they're shading out the oaks. And the firs are also, many of them are sick and rotted out on the inside, and they're really not providing a service except for, they're just shading out the oak trees, and it's the oaks that we want to promote. And we also look back at the historic ideal, and the indigenous people, they didn't let the Douglas fir trees come in. They kept them out. They didn't have any fir trees. They had redwood forests and oak savannas. So the pigs go in and they clear out the trails, and then we go in and we log them, all of the diseased trees and thin out all of the firs, and so we can promote those oaks. And what we see after the pigs come in is just so much green, right? And we like green. We want more green growing plants for more of the year. Yeah.
Is the forest understory enough to feed the pigs, or do you have to?
No, the pigs and chickens need to be supplemented. Yeah, I mean, it helps a lot, but they do get supplemented. And they then eat the acorns as well in the fall. And we raise a lot of chickens. We'll raise about 7,000 chickens this year. And we raise a breed called the Freedom Ranger, and we love them. They're these really cool looking chickens that can actually walk. And I don't know if any of you know about meat chickens. These are meat chickens, but all of the meat chickens that you get from a store, even whatever natural food stores you have here that sell organic chickens, they're all one breed. It's called the Cornish cross. And they're this sort of pumped up hybrid that kind of waddle around, and they're bred for a confinement house. So all of our breeds of animals are breeds that thrive out on pasture. We have, the heritage breed of the Belted Galloway, and Mary's here from the Belted Galloway Association, which is, part of it's right here in Sequim. So really, it's really important to support those groups that are looking to preserve these heritage breeds. And our pigs are all heritage breeds. We raise red wattle and Gloucestershire old spots and large blacks. Those are the three primary breeds we've sort of landed on. And then this breed, although it's not heritage, it was developed in France by the rural farmers when industrial agriculture was moving in. And they wanted a breed that would set them aside through flavor. So it's said to be the best tasting chicken in the world. And they do really great on pasture. And the pastures are incredible that they graze in.
What's it called?
Freedom Ranger is what it's called here in the U.S. And there's only a few hatcheries where you can get them from. So we market our meat online, so people can pre-order and pick up throughout the Bay Area. We don't ship, but we found that as a small family-owned business, it's really important to have a good online presence. And people see that, they go there, they watch our videos, they find out about us. It's very personal. And then they can also, pick out their meat for the week. We're in a number of really large farmers markets in the Bay Area, which give us access to thousands of people going through. And that's our market crew up there. We really try to bring the ranch to the town. So like we'll do fun things like roping demos or photo booths where people can dress up in all the chaps and hats and take pictures. And we do ranch days. That's me leading a tour where we bring people out to the ranch and so they can learn about where their food comes from. And basically, we want to look at what we're doing also and figure out how it can sustain into the future. Agriculture is not free from challenges. Every single form of agriculture, working with nature, it's challenges are inherent, right? And some of the biggest challenges are outside of our control. We can sort of deal with natural challenges that come up, but there's a lot of regulations and things that we come up against these major barriers, and that's where it really takes the whole community to realize, hey, it's really important to keep these rural farmers and ranchers viable and going, and it's going to take all of us because this is our food security. And these farms and ranches should be treated as the commons. And so a lot of times it's up to us as those that are working the land, producing the food, to also be activists, but we really need everybody's help. So we went 2 years ago to Terra Madre in Italy, and Larry went with us too. We were U.S. delegates representing regenerative ranching, and we had 1 million people in the city of Torino marching to show that basically it was right after the merger of the $6 billion merger of Bayer and Monsanto as the agrochemical giant, and all of these farmers from all over the world, farmers that are active, they will go into jail in their country if they speak out against Monsanto. Their children will be taken away from them if they try to teach their children the traditional farming methods. You find these things out at these global conferences that your jaw drops. I mean, it just gives you so much perspective, like, oh gosh, I have nothing to complain about here in California, ranching, and these people are really fighting for their lives. So Slow Food has created this space for all of these delegates. I think from was there like 3,000 delegates from 150 countries or something like that. People from all over. Sharing stories, exchanging knowledge, and marching and being activists and showing that we may not be that, have all of that money, but we are billions of people rising up and speaking out. And also, there's activism right here in our own country too. We did a big effort to support Standing Rock, and we felt like it was also something that is our responsibility to support these indigenous people that are really standing up for protecting the water and protecting the sacred, and saying, hey, there's other ways to do things. We do not need fossil fuels. And my husband went out to Standing Rock and immediately he was, taken in by the spirit riders that were riding on horseback. And, they saw him as a rancher and somebody who could build stuff and was practical. So that's one thing you learn as a farmer or a rancher is, if you go to one of these activism camps, you can really, really make yourself useful. That's us, and I just, like to open it up for questions and just say, I hope that, each of you can look at your own actions and how your food choices are not only impacting your own health and the health of your children, but also the health of the soil. So, thank you very much.
I'm curious where your animals are processed.
Everything is USDA. So because we sell to the public, it has to be inspected. So where we are, the closest abattoir is 2 hours. So we actually go 2 hours in every direction, north, east, and south, to different butchers across the state. But it's a huge bottleneck. My husband's a 6th generation cattle rancher, and when I said I want to transition this and be part of the ranch, but I want it to be 100% grass-fed. I don't want to raise animals that I don't know their future, and it'll most likely be in a feedlot. And he said, yeah, I totally stand behind it, but I have no clue how we can do it, and it's too risky. I don't want to take all the risk. And so I said, okay, well, I'll take part of the risk. We'll figure it out. And yeah, I mean, you not only need the skills of raising all the livestock and stewarding the land and all the water infrastructure and the fencing and everything else, but you also need to figure out how to get that animal processed in a very humane way, and you need to be able to know your butcher, and you need to be a marketer, and you have to develop all of these skills. So that's why we don't see a lot of ranchers. There's not a way to plug in. In industrial ag, there's all kinds of ways you can plug in to one aspect of the life cycle. Take chickens, for instance. We were just visiting the East Coast. We went to Joel Saladin's polyphase farm, but all around that area is a lot of conventional chicken operations. But you have, one farm who does the hatching, and another farm where they raise all the babies, and so it's all sort of consolidated and easy to plug in, and it's not the case for grass-fed, direct market, or organic farming, that kind of thing. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Luke.
Yeah, I'm curious why you chose the Belted Galloway as a breed.
Well, our first exposure was that our neighbor had Belted Galloways, and her bull jumped in with our Angus cows. And we liked the result. So then we just, and it was also that we were at that time transitioning to grass-fed, so doing a lot of research on what kinds of animals would finish well on grass. So the research that we found was that Belted Galloway, because they're a heritage breed from Scotland and they have a double hair coat, so their fat really marbles well in the meat, that they would be sort of superior to the other breeds for finishing on grass alone. Yeah.
And just
Oh, you had a question.
Belted Galloways are really gentle in nature.
Yeah, that too.
If you have an Angus and a Beltie, you're going to be able to pet the Beltie, and the Angus is going to tell you where to go.
Yeah.
So that's why we picked. And he would eat canary grass, and we had a lot of canary grass on our land.
Yeah, that's what we find too. They really go out and they browse, and we have a lot of issues with brush intrusion on our grasslands. You know, we want open grasslands, and we get that brush coming in, and the belted Galloways will do more of the browsing. And yeah, a lot of our ranches are, you know, we see the, you know, in our area, because land prices are so high, our neighbors are either billionaires or, you know, these land trusts have come up. So but the land trusts oftentimes they transition to public land. So we have public and dog walkers, you know, walking amongst our animals. So yeah, the demeanor is really important. What was your question?
Yeah, I'm curious what your labor force looks like, how many people you guys employ, and whether you have like apprentices and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's mainly our family, my husband and I. We have a full-time ranch hand, and then we have a number of part-time people. I think we have about 9 part-time people, and the reason why they're just part-time is because we have high intensity weekends, so we need a lot of people working on the weekends, and for farmers markets. So that's pretty much our most labor intensive sort of, you know, outside labor, not what our, you know, myself and my husband and our ranch hand do, is actually doing the meat and getting prepared for markets and actually going out and doing the sales. So yeah.
Also, I was wondering how you got your start in regenerative ag and kind of maybe who your mentors were?
Yeah, so I have a background in permaculture, and I studied with Penny Livingston for quite a long time. So and so with you know, in permaculture, really learned a lot about you know, how to work with nature and different plants and diversity, and so applied a lot of those principles directly to ranching, and then also holistic management. So I've worked with a lot of holistic management practitioners, you know, some from, you know, Alan Savory's group, and there's also a group called Holistic Management International, which is a great training. They do online classes, and you can get certified through them as well. So yeah, and then my husband, you know, has taught me a lot just about the ranching side of it. Yeah.
Are you actually leasing most of the land, or you mentioned how in the case of the sheep, the neighbors are happy to have you graze because their ethics are aligned with regenerative.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious because it sounds like you're working a lot of acres.
Yeah, we work about 10,000 acres altogether, and that's primarily for cattle. And those lands are land trust and public lands. We have one private land. It started out, it was all private individuals we were dealing with, but then you know, it just sort of changed. Lands changed hands. So, and then we do own a property where we have the pigs, because it's difficult to find somebody who will, you know, lease a pig farm. You know, people aren't too keen on pigs. So we do own that property, and we actually were able to get, there's an agency called the Farm Service Agency, and they're, you know, set up to provide loans for farmers and you know, sort of business assistance. So, you know, we were able to get a land loan from them to purchase the pig property. So yeah, we're mostly leasing. Yeah. And so a lot of those lands, like from the land trust, they go up for public bid, and so we have to put out an RFP, we have to put in a proposal, and you know, we're up against a number of different ranchers. So.
And you're, sounds like you're all the way up in the Jenner area as well.
Yeah, so we're in San Mateo County, Marin County, and Sonoma County. Yeah, so basically we expanded after, you know, right sort of towards the end of the 5-year drought, not because we were running out of forage, but because we were running out of water. And a lot of that was outside of our control because water was being adjudicated elsewhere, and our cattle would just, without any notice, just get cut off. And so we really had to scramble to double the amount of land that we leased, just because we worked so hard to build our genetics of the Belted Galloway that we didn't want to lose that breeding herd. So we needed to expand.
So you're moving the cattle from San Mateo up to Sonoma or you?
No, we keep mother herds at different ranches, but like one of the ranches there's just stalkers. So stalkers are like the teenagers. I mean, they're not that old, but they're kind of like, once after they've left their mom's side before they are being, finished for harvest. So, but we have so we calve in different times of year in different regions. So also to spread out our slaughter, so because we have year-round farmers markets. So we'll do some of the ranches like down south, they do spring calving. The ranches up north do fall calving. So we can sort of center our activity in those regions. And we also expanded because where we are in the Half Moon Bay area is right across from Silicon Valley. So pretty much there's nothing to do with agriculture whatsoever. So there's no support businesses, there's no mills, there's no ranch supply, there's no butcher. So Sonoma County, because they've kept a vibrant organic dairy has really saved those counties for agriculture. Because those dairies were able to survive by transitioning to organic and getting that higher price point. So they've been able to keep those businesses in business, because the dairies also need the slaughterhouse and all the farm supplies and the mills. So that's partially why we expanded to lease land. Our farthest ranch is 3 hours away from our house, but we're traveling up there all the time because that's where all of our agriculture support businesses are. Yeah.
More along the lines of less the farming and more just like the continual process. You talked about how the land that's left alone and what it's like in its root structure and the amount of carbon that it's holding, and what you're doing with bringing the cattle in and really biodiversifying what's going on there to increase the carbon holding. What is wrong with the natural process that we would need to increase what is being held? Is it just because we as humans have increased the amount of, say, greenhouse gases and carbon emissions that are actually going on? Or is there a process that we need to tweak within nature in order to get it to get what you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, nature isn't what nature was 300 years ago in this country. So we need to look at, where does succession really, where do we want to be as a species, and how can we integrate with the land? And a big factor is the amount of animals that are no longer existent. So there was, millions of bison in this country, large elk and, herds of thousands, all along, I'm sure this area in California. So basically, if this planet would do fine without humans, but do we want to continue on this planet, then we need to look at how to take our place as humans and be part of that nature. So just like how, we let our chickens be out at pasture and express what it means to be a chicken and actually walk and, peck at the ground, and we let our pigs, go and browse and root around and express what it means to be a pig. And so humans, we really need to express what it means to be a human, really in a basic sense of, we are tending our food source, and our food source is relying on a stable climate. So this is one way we can say, okay, there's a lot of things that are out there for climate change, but The real solution is biological. And the problem with that is that so many people don't have a context for that biological cycle. You talk to legislatures at the Capitol and they don't understand because they have no context of nature and soil. So I would say if you have, and if you could do one thing for your kids or for yourself is to go out and immerse in nature and to learn how nature functions so that you can then take your part in that cycle. And there's some great books. There's one for California called Tending the Wild by Kat Anderson. And it just shows how intentional the indigenous people were for pruning and for gardening and for planting. And they were really tending the wild and tending their food source. So yeah, I mean, nature will be fine without us, but do we want to be a part of that? So, does that answer your question?
Can I add a little bit to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess one of the ways that it's been useful for me to understand things is a lot of these ecosystems, when they were in their most biodiverse and abundant, had certain relationships between different species. And so we had, like you said, bison, I can see, and apex predators, and certain patterns that were established co-evolved with the grasslands. And as things have developed with, privatizing land and fencing things off, and certain species being, wiped out or, pushed out of areas and stuff like that, a lot of the symbiotic interactions with the ecosystem have been breaking down. And so it's over a longer time scale than we're maybe used to because we maybe didn't see what it looked like many generations ago. But essentially, because these interactions from the animals and things are no longer occurring, the ecosystem processes are just kind of degrading essentially. And so by using these sort of domesticated species as proxies for wildlife, you can still have a lot of the same interactions and rehabilitate these ecosystems. And ideally, I think, at least personally, my vision would be to see a lot of these wildlife populations, return again and to establish some of those relationships and stuff. But just within the context of trying to make it financially viable to restore landscapes, because there's not a lot of money in it, unless you can find a way to basically be a producer and be able to make an income, and then restore these landscapes, and then we can kind of decide where to go from there and how we might be able to create space for wilderness and wilderness, So that's sort of how I'm looking at that.
And then, sorry, do you mind if I ask a continuation on that one? Right. So we're choosing to do it in a manner with what we have available and is both profitable or sustainable for us financially, right? I'm not saying profitable, I'm saying good, like you said, it's going to be sustainable for us to do it without outside backing, or we haven't gone to a society that doesn't use money yet. But so we're choosing to use, say, cattle, which is livestock, and that we might be fixing carbon into the soil, but we know that cattle produces between 18 and like 30% of each individual country's greenhouse gases through methane. So as we're choosing to do more of this style of livestock, are we looking at what the other impacts are beyond our local home and what we're doing for that land?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it usually does come up. Yes, cattle have a really bad name. And we need to look at distinguishing feedlot beef with grass-fed beef. And yes, cattle produce methane. And yes, all of those bison that were once here on this planet also produce methane. And all of the elk also produce methane. And guess what? Nature has figured out a solution for that. Because there is something in the soil, in healthy soils, called methanotropes, and they actually feed on methane. So why did we not have these greenhouse gas problems when there was millions of bison here? And it's because we had healthy soils, and those healthy soils absorb those methane. So the key thing here is how can we get those cattle out of the feedlot, and how can we stop tilling the soil to produce grain crops to feed the livestock that are in the confinement houses. And just like the 4 per 1,000 initiative, increasing the world's agriculture soils by 4%. Yeah, it seems like a huge, lofty, out of reach goal, but somebody's charted out the path, right? We also, there's a great study that one of our customers did, and it's, I'd have to pull it up, but basically that the US, because other people say, oh, you can't feed the world on grass-fed beef. But she actually did a study that said, yes, if we stop growing crops for livestock, and we turn that land back into grassland, and we take all of the cattle out of the feedlots and put them on that grassland, it is actually possible to feed the U.S. demand for meat on grass-fed production. So I can forward, if anybody wants to email me, I'll forward you that. It's a very good peer-reviewed research report. So, but there's lots of barriers, right? Like anything. So, and Luke brought up one more.
Excuse me.
One more good point, which I think I just sort of skipped over, is that these herds of grazing animals were not without predators. So, yeah, you can say, and like there's been certain parks in California that's like, oh, let's reintroduce the elk. Well, that does nothing unless you have something moving them around. It's like the studies in Yellowstone, where when they introduced the wolves, all of a sudden the riparian areas started to come back, the songbirds started to come back, the beavers started to come back, because the wolves were actually moving the elk around and allowing the plants and the life to recover. So, I would say you could probably make a good case for reintroducing elk, but grizzly bear and, wolves, there's much more political stigma around that, so.
Can we turn on the lights again?
Oh, good idea.
So I know California has a carbon program, and they're using some of that funding to protect ag land and implement
Yes.
carbon sequestration. Washington is going to have a chance to vote on a carbon program, and the focus has been more on forestry. I'm just wondering if you have any experience working with any of the carbon programs that California has, and what that looks like in terms of a project.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So the organization that is sort of the go-to, and I think Washington and every single state should have this, and in California it's called CalCan, California Climate and Agriculture Network. So it's, and they're, last I heard, they were the only lobbying group that's specific for climate and agriculture. So most groups are climate or agriculture. So they have really spearheaded a lot of these great initiatives and bills that have come through that are providing grants for carbon sequestration and like the land, setting the land, rural lands aside and all of that. And yeah, I went to apply for a grant to spread compost on our rangeland. And I think, part of the California Department of Food and Ag, took on this Healthy Soils program. And they had millions of dollars to give out to different farmers, and basically once they got a hold of it, then the bureaucracy got involved, and when it came down to it, I would have spent 10 hours on an application. It would have been cheaper just to do it myself. So typically that's what happens when it gets to that government level. Because they were requiring 3 years of massive amounts of compost application, which would have been really cost prohibitive when the Marin Carbon Project research is based on just a light dusting, a 1/4 inch of compost for 1 year, one single application, and that will sequester 1 ton of carbon per hectare every year. And you don't have to reapply that compost. And the state got involved and they said, oh no, well, you gotta do it for 3 years. And we're only gonna pay you for the first 2 years. And no, you gotta do a half inch or something like that. So it just didn't make any sense for us to apply. But there's a lot of other things. I mean, like diversified hedgerows along the farms. And, you're probably familiar with the federal EQIP program with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And so, a lot of that funding has been funneled through those programs as well. So, you can work with, I don't know what it's called here, but we have the Resource Conservation District that implements a lot of these healthy soils programs. So, yeah. Great. Well, it's just about time. Is there any other questions?
I've got
Yeah.
a quick question. In general, this is all new to me and I'm glad I'm here, but in general in the country, like all over the United States, it sounds like California's got a lot of progressive, kind of approaches. Do we have a shot here? I mean, is it happening in this country? Is there more of this initiative for sustainable agriculture going on?
There's hot spots. There's a farmer in North Dakota, Gabe Brown, who's doing this no-till agriculture, incorporating livestock on a really large scale. So there's, in the Midwest throughout, there's definitely pockets. What we do have, I may be in somewhat of a bubble being in the Bay Area, because what we do have is billionaires that are backing this at that level. So they're stepping up and putting a lot of their funds towards this research. And they're saying, okay, there's one couple that basically has put all of their money into a bank, and they're lending and only investing in companies that are providing healthy soils. So I don't know. I mean, Seattle is becoming similar to the Bay Area. So I would say, just like we have, we work with a lot of people from Silicon Valley, and they're developing great things for this, and they're seeing this problem, and they're wanting to direct their money towards it. I'm sure there's a lot of that going on in Seattle too. So
It's so critical, so obviously critical.
yeah, but nationwide, with this administration, there's no. I mean, it's just, somebody said at that global climate change that basically, if there's not vision in the government, if there's not like a really clear vision, then there's just fighting. All it is fighting. And so there's no vision in the White House. There's no clear vision. So all it is fighting.
But that's when industry and individuals can take the lead.
Yeah.
Because obviously they're not going to, so that's when it's up to us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's why it would be good for, states to start stepping up, and, regions to start stepping up. So, yeah.
I think also just kind of a perspective is like, sort of you're talking about the majority of the population is now urban, and the power of the consumer, and particularly in the U.S., because the U.S. pretty much sets the trends for the rest of the world in terms of agriculture and things like that, by large part. And so essentially, the responsibility of people in this country, really sort of supporting the producers that are really taking that extra effort in making those methods viable, and then kind of developing market trends in that direction, which hopefully have a cascading effect, which then transform the sort of dominant modality that's essentially export, because so much of the agricultural regime, sort of came out of this country and is to some varying degrees imposed or picked up, in other places in the world and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One other thing that's making a bigger impact, and hopefully will in the future, and I didn't mention it, but that picture of the Minister of Agriculture and he was holding the book called Kiss the Ground. So I recommend everybody picking up that book. It's great. It really puts all of this regenerative agriculture into a really clear, digestible format. And our ranch is featured in that book. Gabe Brown's ranch is featured in that book. The story of the Paris Climate Conference is featured. And that is going to be a documentary that should be on Netflix in the spring. So you'll see our family and some other ranches profiled. So keep an eye out for that. And sign up on they've got great newsletters. They've got a soil curriculum that I think they give out for free for middle schoolers. And they come do trainings. Yeah, great folks. I work closely with them. Kiss the Ground. So, and they're very influential. They're based out of LA and connected with many celebrities, so they can have that pull as well. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.